What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2018 BMW M4 F82. Today on the M4, we're going to be covering how to do an ignition service. This will be applicable to your vehicles equipped with an S55. In front of us, we have one of our kits, which includes some Delphi ignition coils, as well as some NGK plugs. We're installing one-step coulter plugs today, as the vehicle behind us is tuned. So we'll be showing you how to gap those properly for that. Now, the one thing we're not going to be replacing on this car, just due to the mileage, is the ignition coil itself, but we still wanted to highlight them and talk about them and show you how to do that should you be replacing yours on your vehicle. We also have a little bit of hardware here that's one-time use, which we'll show you once we're removing our brace on the car. BMW recommends 25,000 mile intervals for the one-step coulter plugs. Otherwise, 37 to 40,000 mile is going to be your normal service. Ignition coils will last a little bit longer, anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles, but that's not to say they can't go past 100. Usually once one goes bad, you'll get a misfire, multiple misfire if you have plenty of them that have failed. This car is just under 30,000 miles, so we're going to go ahead and stick with the ones that are in it. Now, before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. So the first tool we want to talk about, and we're going to single this one out just because this applies to you if you are looking to gap the plugs for the one-step coulter install. We're going to use this Torque Solutions gapping tool. This is exactly what you need to gap these fine point spark plugs. Now the way this works is you thread the plug into the tool. And again, the goal here is to close the gap up a bit. We're looking for 0.022 inches or 0.56 millimeters. We have our feeler gauge ready to rock and roll. We have it set on the correct sizing. That's pretty good on the spark plug there. I'm going to use the bottom portion of the tool to thread in the stud inside of here to push down on our ground strap or our ground electrode. Now, before we go ahead and compress this, if I insert this feeler gauge in, I have a ton of play here. It's obviously over gapped for our application. So we're just going to do slow, maybe 1/8 turns increments until this feeler gauge is nice and snug. Now we're being gentle here. We're not looking to damage the tip on the spark plug. We don't want to jam it in there. Now, I'm compressed this enough to the point where the feeler gauge itself will not go in, but you have to keep in mind that when you remove the stud that's running the ground electrode back up, the electrode's going to want to bend back a little bit. It's metal, it doesn't just bend and stay in place. So right now we have it just a hair too tight. I'm going to back this up. Then I'm going to see if my feeler gauge will sit in. And it's still a little loose, so we're going to go ahead and tighten it back up once more. So there, it's a little tight. Back it up. And now it's nice and perfect. So we're going to go ahead and do that to all 6 spark plugs. And after this, we can take a look at the regular tools for this DIY and then get started on this job. For this job, you're going to need a torque wrench. We're also using a 3/8 drive ratchet with a couple different extensions, as well as one that has a swivel head at the end. That's going to come in handy with our 14mm 12-point magnetic Beru socket. This will make life a lot easier when we install and remove our old spark plugs. We also have a 16mm socket, a 13, a 10, an E14, an E12, as well as a T30. I'm using CTA flexible drivers, both a 6mm and 7mm. You can use a flathead screwdriver. You might need a stubby to substitute those. Using this Torque Solution gapping tool for our spark plugs, which we just spoke about, along with our feeler gauge. A small pick or small flathead screwdriver will come in handy. This is just a rivet removal tool, which will help us remove some of the rivets under the hood. This is also an install tool for spark plugs. This is going to be linked below in the description. And this allows you to feed the end of the spark plug into the hose here and feed it gently into the cylinder head so you don't drop it and change the gapping or damage it by accident. We're also going to be using an electric ratchet just to help ourselves out a little bit. Get some flashlights handy, and let's get started with this DIY. All right, my good people, we are about to get started on the M4 over here. Obviously, first things first is make sure you're working on a cool engine. Last thing you want to do is work on a hot engine. A, it's not great for the plugs. Metal shrinks, expands, all that good stuff. You can throw off your torquing when you put in new plugs. And B, you don't want to burn yourself. So nice cold engine. We're going to start by removing some covers up here. We have three 10mm locking nuts on both of these cowl pieces on either side. They do a quarter turn. So we're just going to use a 10mm socket and turn those so we can unlock, just like so. Then there's a tiny expanding rivet by the hood shock that also holds these in. So I'm going to use a rivet tool or rivet removal tool to get that popped up. If not, we'll switch over to a flathead screwdriver. And we can just go ahead and pull this cover off. And we're going to go ahead and do the same on the other side. Next on our laundry list of things to do, we're just going to prep everything that we can to get this brace off, as well as the one on the back. For now, to get this off, we have two rubber seals that just peel back like so. There is a rivet holding it on the inboard here. Not totally necessary to get it off, but you can if you'd like. We're going to be pulling the top half portion of them off as well. But this will just allow the strut bar or the reinforcement bar to go through the seals. We have a total of 8 13mm bolts holding this in, 3 on either side by the strut towers, and 2 shorter 13s up at the front. So we're going to go ahead and zap those out first. We'll pull this off, and then we'll continue on with this rubber sealage up here. Just remember the 2 front 13s are the shortest 2 out of the 8. And now that we have those 13s on them, we have 1 bolt here. Now, depending on what your car is equipped with, we have an Venturi system in here, so the hardware may change depending on what intake system your car has, if you have the factory or not. But we have a 10mm bolt here that we're going to take off. That attaches the brace to the expansion tank. And now with that off, we can go ahead and pull our brace off. And we'll just set this gently to the side. We have a couple expanding rivets that we want to remove on these insulators over the strut towers. The driver's side has a third one here on the inboard side of things. It's not really in the way. We're just going to swing this over so we can leave that one on. But we do have to remove these electrical connectors. So same thing using our trim removal tool. We'll just get underneath it and pop it off. Just swing it over to the side. We'll do the same with our expanding rivets here. Let's get those lifted up and started. And we have one more on the inboard here. And this will lift up. We have one more rivet right here on the fender. And then we can go ahead and work this up. We have one more rivet here on the inside of the fender, also holding this in. It's a very secure piece. Now we can work that over. Just let it hang up to the side. And let's go do the same thing on the passenger side. Just going to tuck this one over to the side. Each strut, if your car is equipped with the electronic dampers, has a small cover over the top of the strut hat. There's an electrical connector that sits inside of it. So we're going to pop this dust cover off first. Just lift up on it, and that will expose the electrical connector. We're going to go ahead and pull that one off. Once we pull the dust cap off, we can unplug the connector going to our dampers. These are for cars equipped with the EDC. I'm just going to use a small pick. I'm going to grab the head of the connector, and using the small pick, I'm going to lift from underneath. I'm just going to lift this connector up, and we're just going to unplug it, and we'll tuck it off to the side. Do the same thing on the driver's side. And while we're over here, we have a small bracket held in by a 10mm bolt and a T30. We're just going to loosen them up so we can pull this bracket off as we will be removing this brace. You have a 10mm on the strut tower. And while we could probably get away with it, I'm just going to loosen up this T30, make our life a little bit easier, and just get this bracket out of our way for the time being. You could probably just swing it over, but it takes 2 seconds to do it the right way. While I have you here, we have this rubber weather stripping that runs along the back of our engine here, engine compartment. There's part of the harness that runs through it. You can see me lifting it up here with my finger. Go ahead and pull that harness out all the way across. And then you can lift the seal up and just pull it out of the way for now. Next, we're going to work on removing this brace. We have 2 plugs here on our cowl under our windshield wiper arm. I'm you can just pop these covers off. That'll expose two 16mm bolts. Those are going to be the two 16s that we're going to be replacing, as they are torque to yield hardware. So for now, I'm just going to break them free. Got 16 on the ratchet. I'm going to zap them out the rest of the way. We have 5 E12s on either side of our brace to remove, 3 at the strut tower, 1 at the back here, and 1 by our hood strut, followed by an E14, which is going to be the bigger one inside this cylinder. So we'll get those off on either side, and then this brace can come out. We have an E14 in here, and now we'll just do the same thing on the passenger side and get this brace off. Now let me set these to the side, and then we can pull this brace off. For that, we're going to lift the brace up, being gentle not to scratch our fenders, the car, or anything else. Clear the expansion tank for the air to water cooler, and then set this piece to the side. Next, we're going to work on removing the lower portion of our cowling here at the firewall that sat under our brace. It's held in by 6 10mm bolts, 3 on each side. Just be mindful of this vacuum line here when you pull this up. Now we can lift this up and squeeze it out of here. That's going to give us all the access we need to access the back coils against the firewall. With our cowling off, we can pull our beauty cover off now. Just be gentle. They just pop up and set it to the side. We have a couple clamps here that we're going to want to undo. And then if we follow the piping down, we have a couple E-Torx bolts to undo. So let's get ready to do that next. Next, to access the hardware that holds these pipes to our intercooler in place, we need to remove our Venturi intake on the passenger side. We have our sensor here to disconnect. That just has a small tab. Press in. Here we go. We can just tuck this over to the side. And then to get to our clamps, I'm going to use one of the CTA flexible drivers. I'm just going to reach underneath the intake here. You can also use a stubby flathead screwdriver. This is the 7mm driver. That should be enough to pop this up. I'm going to do the secondary clamp as well, just in case it wants to separate at the bottom versus the top. We just have a rubber grommet here that this pops into, and we can go ahead and set this to the side. To get started, we're going to undo the clamps up top here first. And if you haven't already, make sure you put a towel or a glove or something sealing the charge pipe down there so nothing falls in it. I just have a bunch of shop towel, plugging it up. Flathead screwdriver will do the trick here, or a 6mm driver. I'm using the CTA screwdriver again. And now we can switch over to our E12 socket. We have one E12 down here by the front. Then we have one more behind our pipe here on the back. Genius. That is a captured bolt, similar to what you would find on your valve cover, so it's going to stay with the pipe. Then we're just going to have to work it off. Be mindful there is a grommet here that helps align it on top of the valve cover as well. And we also have this harness that runs through it. Just pop it out. We also have this harness that runs to it. Just pop off the metal clip and set this to the side. For the back E12, I'm using an extension with a swivel head, or a wobble head if you will. I'm just going to reach in there for one moment to get it to seat all the way on. Beautiful. Same deal. That one is also captured. And we'll set this baby to the side. Same deal. This one has a locating dowel on the valve cover as the other side. Now we're going to pull off our insulation cover, if you will. This just pops up, similar to the beauty cover up top. It's just held in by a couple grommets. And set it to the side. Finally, gaining access to our ignition coils and spark plugs. All right, my good people, at this point, we're ready to pull our ignition coils and plugs. A couple things I want to mention. I recommend you blow everything off with some compressed air before you remove anything. In addition to that, make sure that any openings to the turbos, to the intercooler, charge pipe are blocked off. We have shop towels on all of them. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to take some compressed air and blow off any dust that may be up here. This car doesn't have a lot of miles on it, so I can't imagine it's going to be too dirty, but you never know. So even though this is a low mile example, there was still quite a bit in there. All right, next we're going to talk ignition coils. Now, these latches up top are responsible for holding the electrical connector to them in place. So when you lift these up, you're going to be gentle with them. They're going to slowly push the electrical connector off. If they're not, you can give the sides a pinch, and it should do the same. And then it'll pop the connector off, and you can pull it off the rest of the way. Now, where you have to be very careful, especially as these cars get older, is when you pull the ignition coil off. They're just press fit, and you're going to pull them up by the tab. The tab is just held on by two tiny ears on either side, so you want to pinch it at the bottom here where it meets the head of the coil while you lift it up. And that will keep you from ripping this little connector, this little tab off. They're super delicate. You can work the coil off in a non-recommended way, if you will, after the fact if this has come off, but it's pretty important, so just be gentle with it. We're going to set our coil to the side, and then same deal. I recommend you blow some compressed air to the spark plug tube, just to ensure there's no debris in there. Next, we're going to take our spark plug socket with our swivel head extension, same one that we used on the E12. This is crucial as you can't just go straight in with a fixed extension, so you need it to be able to flex a little bit at the bottom. And again, remember this is magnetic, so it's going to make removal of the spark plug a lot easier, and same with the install. Make sure it's seated all the way in. And we'll take our ratchet and break it free, and then back it out the rest of the way. And with that, there's our old plug. This is what 27,000 miles looks like. Not horrible, definitely some wear there, but that's all right. We're gonna go ahead and grab our new plug now. Two ways of installing the new plugs. If you have the magnetic socket like we do, you can simply feed the new plug onto the socket. That's gonna keep it in place. It's not gonna go anywhere. If you're not using a magnetic socket, you can use either the BMW tool that we mentioned at the beginning of the video, or a small piece of fuel hose. Feed the socket onto that, and then gently feed it in. The goal is to not hit the electrode here and change the gapping. So I'm gonna use my socket, just because that's what we use to pull them out. It'll be good to put it back in. We're gonna feed this down very gently. Then what I like to do whenever I'm doing spark plugs on any car is I like to back up the threads a bit. So if there was any engagement when it went down, I lessen the chance of stripping this spark plug or the cylinder head. And then we can start it by hand. We're gonna snug these down to 23 Newton meters. We have our torque wrench set to 23 Newton meters. Now we're gonna go ahead and tighten down our plugs. Oh, it's not a spark plug. Then we can pull our spark plug socket out, and we can install our ignition coil once more. The shape of the coil allows it to key itself onto the valve cover. There's a little notched V there, and that's where the end of the coil here sits, so it only goes on one way. I'm gonna feed that in. I'm gonna take advantage of the height here and plug in my electrical connector. This just gives me a little bit more room to work with. Get that snug up. Make sure that the latch is coming down and locking the electrical connector in place. And then we can push it the rest of the way and seat it on top of our spark plug. Now we're gonna go ahead and repeat the same process on the remainder 5. They're all super accessible. No real funny tricks to get any of them out. So let's get those taken care of. And then we'll start putting this baby back together. With our ignition coils and spark plugs back in, we're going to reinstall this little insulation cover and making sure this back wire also stays above it. We're gonna line up our locking tab here on the valve cover so we know that we have it lined up properly. Kept getting hung up on the hose clamp for our charge pipes. Make sure it clips down. Should be nice and snug. Take these plugs out of our water cooler here. And we can take the plugs out of our inlets down here by our turbos. And now we can feed our charge pipes back in, starting with the back one, and then we'll work our way to the front one. We're gonna feed our inner charge pipe down, being mindful of it at the bottom, making sure that our little ear or tab here lines up with the dowel on the valve cover. We're gonna feed it up into our intercooler. There we go. Once we have it seated on both ends, we can go ahead. I'm gonna start by installing our E12 first, making sure that's nice and snug. I'm just gonna reach in and feed my bolts in. They're not very captured as one would normally think. That's okay. We're gonna get that started by hand, and then we're just gonna snug it up gently, no more than we would if we were doing a valve cover bolt. We have our E12 snug up by hand. We're gonna feed our socket down using our swivel head extension, wobble extension. Then we'll snug it up using our 3/8 drive ratchet. Snug, good, no need to go anymore. And we can button it up by doing the 2 clamps up top. Now we'll go ahead and install the front charge pipe, same process. We're gonna feed our front charge pipe in. Don't forget to reattach the battery cable here to the little tab. We'll do that once we have it fed into place. There we go, it's nice and snug. Get our E12 started by hand. Then we'll do our battery cable. Just pop that metal tab on. And we have our hose clamps. Again, 6mm driver or flathead screwdriver will snap these up nicely. All right, now with that, we can go ahead and reinstall our intake. And then I'm just gonna reach in and tighten down both of our clamps on this side, and we fed in our little tab into the rubber grommet over here. If you have the stock air box, you have 2 rubber grommets to deal with. Now we can swing our harness over and plug in our sensor once more. All right, that was just gonna live there. Now that we have this buttoned up, we can reinstall the rear portion of our firewall cowl, so let's do that next. We're just gonna go ahead and feed this back in, being mindful not to pinch any wires or cables while we're doing this. All right, we'll get our 3 10mm started on this side. Then we'll start the 3 on the other side. Once we're happy with how everything's lined up, these 2 pieces line up nicely over here, we can go ahead and snug them down with the electric ratchet. All right, now we have that situated, we can reinstall our metal brace. So let's do that now. Be mindful that you don't scratch your car or the fender or hit anything else while you're installing this. Take your time with it. There's no rush, my good people. All right, I'm gonna start with the 2/16s in the back. We're just gonna get all our hardware started by hand. Remember, these 2 need to be replaced as they are torque to yield hardware. Once we have everything started by hand, then we'll go around and snug everything down. E14 down in the bigger hole over here, 1 on each end. We have 5 E12s, 1 on either side, or 5 on either side, sorry. We're gonna go ahead and torque down all 10 of our E12s down to 28 Newton meters. This is gonna be a common torque spec across the board. Our 2 E14s get torqued down to 34 Newton meters, 1 on each side. On the driver's side, we have the small bracket that secures the expansion tank to the strut tower. We can reinstall that now. That's held in by a 10 millimeter and a T30 on the tank side. At this point, we can go ahead and reconnect our electrical connectors to our EDC dampers. They are keyed, they only go on one way. So make sure you reinstall them back the same way. Flip that bad boy all the way down. And the dust cap can go back on. We'll leave these off for now until we get our boots back over those. Now we're going to install our rubber seal and then line this part of the harness back into it. There's a channel here on the back of the seal, this thin one right here, that allows it to key onto this piece of the cowl here, this thin piece. So make sure you line those up and you get them to engage properly. With that on, we can tuck our little wire harness back into the weather stripping here. With that situated, now we can go ahead and reinstall our carbon fiber brace across the front. So let's do that now. And while I have you up here by the seal, we're going to finalize these two 16 millimeter bolts. These we're going to tighten down to 56 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. There's two. And we can put our plugs back on. All right, with that buttoned up, we can reinstall our carbon brace. So let's do that now. All right, now we have our brace situated, our seals on. I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall our beauty cover once more. Just be sure to line up the 4 grommets on the bottom, right underneath top of the valve cover here. Once you get one started, they'll all line up. Now we can reinstall our carbon fiber brace across the front. This is held in by 8 13 millimeter bolts, two shortest ones being up front. We're going to torque all 8 down to 28 Newton meters. Then we'll snug up the 10 mil on our expansion tank bracket here. Now we'll reinstall our booties, making sure that this harness underneath is tucked in properly, coming out the back here on either side. We'll situate the other side real quick, and then we'll reinstall all our plastic rivets. Now we can install our upper cowl pieces once more, keying them in over at the center by those two plugs. While we also feed it into our main cowl, expanding rivet on the end. Then we have our 10 millimeter socket to lock the 3 tabs in the back. Again, just a quarter turn. Do the same on the other side. And that, my good people, is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a straightforward job on the F82. Just a lot of plastic and carbon fiber and hardware to remove, but overall, not difficult. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.